It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. I'm Bridget Bergen, sitting in for Brian today. Molly Fischer's latest story in The New Yorker begins with the basic assumption that Costco is in a golden age and tries to understand how a warehouse store ended up with such an outsized place in American life. She writes about how the warehouse experience, with all its parking hassles and long lines, has somehow become part of Costco's appeal, and how word of mouth, not advertising, helped build its almost mythic reputation. Her piece looks at the values that shaped Costco's rise, from its promise of abundance at low markups to the role of leaders like Jim Sinegal, the rare CEO remembered as both successful and beloved. But she also reports on the tensions beneath that feel-good image, new union activity, shrinking workplace perks, and questions about whether the culture that made Costco special can endure as the company gets bigger. So what exactly makes Costco Costco? And can this golden age endure? With us now is Molly Fischer, staff writer at The New Yorker. Molly, welcome to WNYC.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be here.
And listeners, we'd especially love to hear from people who work at Costco or used to. How has the workplace culture changed over the years? What feels the same? What's changed? And for shoppers, what keeps you loyal to Costco, or what maybe pushed you away? Call in and tell us your Costco story. The number's 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. You can also text that number. And Molly, you begin the piece with the detail that your family's Costco in San Jose opened the same week you were born. How did starting there help you understand the personal relationship so many people seem to have with Costco?
I was kind of shocked to discover that fact. I had not realized that before I started working on this story. But in retrospect, it makes perfect sense because Costco was really an institution that felt like it was just part of the landscape of my childhood. And, in my mind, it was something that was very specific to California, to the Bay Area, to the kind of particular place where I happened to grow up. But very, very quickly, it became clear to me, both by becoming an adult and someone who had traveled beyond the Bay Area, but also by talking to so many people in the course of working on this story, that it figured similarly in many people's lives across the country. People have stories of, growing up, going to the Costco mission with their weekly trip with their parents, getting the samples, looking at the giant TVs, feeling the smooth concrete floors under their feet. It's kind of a sense memory that I think, especially perhaps generationally. I mean, I was born in 1986, and the 80s and 90s were the period when Costco was just growing like crazy. So I think there are a lot of people who are now entering the part of their lives when perhaps they have families of their own and are interested in buying some practical bulk goods, who have a lot of fond feelings toward this company and are perhaps thinking of becoming members of their own.
Now, shopping at Costco is not exactly an easy experience the time. There's the parking and the crowds and the lines. And yet, even in your telling, I can hear the affection you have for it in your voice. So why doesn't the hassle turn people away?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, think about it. Throughout working on this piece, Amazon felt like an instructive contrast to me in some ways. I mean, the companies are very different, but, they're both places where people buy a lot of stuff. They operate on a tremendous scale. They're both based in Seattle area. And, people rely on them and expect good prices from them. That's the proposition in some ways. But with Amazon, it's a matter of going online, clicking a button, and expecting a thing to show up at your door with no hassle, no effort, whatever. That's kind of your expectation and what you're hoping to get out of the deal. With Costco, you're going to have to jump through all these hoops. You have to become a member. You have to drive to a warehouse. I mean, it's true that they do some delivery now. It's possible to get Costco delivered, but that's sort of not the core of the experience they're offering. You're going to have to show up in this particular place. Maybe it's not so conveniently located. You're going to have to steer a giant cart. These are shopping carts that can seat 2 children in the seat at the top. So they're big, and you're going to have to look through a warehouse to find huge quantities of all the stuff you want. And yet, I think part of what results from that is that people have a sense of accomplishment when they come home with their Costco haul. It's almost like a primal hunter-gatherer thing or something, I think, where, you feel like you've achieved something by getting a good deal, but also just literally navigating this environment that is not necessarily conducive to a quick in and out experience. And in a funny way, I think that has helped to build the Costco mythology because people do like to compare notes with their friends, talk about, the deal that they found when they went this past week. They like
Sure.
to, compare notes on the Costco employees who maybe they've met and gotten to know. I think that very human side of the company, the fact that there are people working there who you might see week after week and who might continue working at the same warehouse for years and years and years is also a big part of why the company has succeeded to the degree that it has and why it matters whether or not the company is able to remain a place where people want to keep working for years and years.
Oh, listeners, we want to hear your Costco stories, and I know there are Costco stories out there. That Brooklyn Costco parking lot is legendary. So give us a call. The number is 212-433-9692. You can call or text that number. One listener texted, "What used to keep me away was the annual membership fee, but now I believe you get that back in savings." Molly, I mean, this is a different model. This isn't a place that just anyone can go shop to. You have to become part of the Costco community, right?
Yeah, I mean, in a very literal way, you're paying a membership fee, and now they have sort of different tiers of membership. You could be a gold star member or an executive member. And, one thing that I was sort of amazed to find in writing this story was that the executive membership cards, which were first rolled out in, I believe, 1999, certainly at least 20 years ago, 25 years ago, have not been redesigned since they were initially rolled out. Like the one I have in my wallet is identical to the one you would have gotten 2 decades ago. So the company is not focused on sort of things like graphic design or PR or advertising. But to the broader question, yeah, you are paying a membership fee, and on one hand, I think there's sort of a psychological degree to which people have a sense of, well, I've paid this fee, I might as well go buy the paper towels that I need, the oatmeal that I need, the dog food that I need, whatever, at Costco rather than stopping at Target or Walmart or whatever. But I think, there's also the important way that it factors into Costco's business model, which is that, a large portion of the company's profits come from the membership fees that they are able to charge. And so they know that they can really whittle down their profit margins on the goods that they sell to be quite narrow. They like to say that they are constantly working to charge customers less rather than more on any given product, because they know that they've got kind of this cushion of the membership fees. And offering someone a membership fee does not cost them anything. That's a just pure profit for them, basically.
We have a listener who texted, "I bought a car with four-wheel drive for camping. I use the four-wheel drive most often in the Costco parking lot, pulling in to dubiously legal parking spots on the gravel."
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you hear about lawless behavior in the Costco parking lots. I mean, I remember my sister-in-law just telling me, she lived in San Diego for a while, and she was kind of shell-shocked as she said, they just park anywhere. People would park anywhere in that parking lot. So, it kind of runs the gamut.
You describe Costco as rooted in an order ideal of, quote, bounty, equitably and efficiently distributed. In 2025, what does that ideal look like inside an actual warehouse?
Sure. Well, I mean, if we want to get into the history of Costco and how kind of a certain set of political ideals shaped the company, I think you could look back to the founder, Saul Price, and kind of his vision of what it meant to be a good employer and how he saw his responsibility to his customers and employees, because he did think of himself as, I'm sorry, I should say, the founder, not of Costco, but of the company that was sort of Costco's predecessor and where a number of its employees and executives and its founders started their careers. But he sort of is a godfather of Costco, and he's someone who very much saw himself as having a responsibility to treat his employees and his customers well. And I think that has, to a remarkable degree, endured into the Costco of 2025. But, I think that there are challenges now for any company, any brand trying to operate in a kind of complicated landscape. There's complications like questions over DEI. There was earlier this year, sort of end of last year, early this year, a wave of press around various companies deciding to back down or not back down on their diversity policies. And Costco received a lot of favorable attention for very unequivocally telling certain conservative activist groups that had tried to pressure them to change their DEI commitments that they were not going to do that, and that they saw a commitment to diversity as part of the way that they were able to most effectively serve their customer base. And this, really set them up for this favorable contrast with places like Target, where there had been a pullback on some of this stuff,
Sure.
and that customers had reacted really negatively against. So, I think you see borne out in various ways throughout its history a sense that doing right and sort of treating your customers and your employees right can be, in fact, a good business model. Not a matter of charity or altruism or anything like that, but simply an effective way of being a business that is sustainable in the long term and beloved. But that's not necessarily easy. I mean, the sort of counterexample to that, I suppose, in some ways, is that Costco also came in for a lot of controversy over the question of whether or not its pharmacies would sell mifepristone, the abortion drug, or an abortion drug. And, there were, in the wake of the Dobbs decision, a number of reproductive rights activists who were pressing places like Costco, Walgreens, other big pharmacy retail chains to make sure that they would start carrying mifepristone, which was not something Costco had done previously. And Costco ultimately decided they would not begin carrying the drug. There were sort of a lot of confusing headlines around this that maybe gave you the impression, if you were reading casually or dipping into the story, that Costco was, pulling it from its shelves or something, and that was not the case. But I think it speaks to the difficulty of looking to, a for-profit company to kind of navigate these complicated political questions and to kind of try to ensure access around healthcare, say. That's maybe even a company that is trying to make the world a better place and harbors some liberal ideals. Like, that's not necessarily something that it's super well equipped to address. So it can be tricky.
Well, I want to get in. We have a whole bunch of Costco stories on the phone.
Oh, amazing.
So let's get some of those callers in there. Let's start with Mary in Fairfield County, Connecticut. Mary, I think you're a Costco fan. Is that correct?
I'm a big Costco fan. I love it. You want a list of why I love it?
Tell us your story.
First of all, I so disagree with anybody who says they have a great sense of accomplishment coming out of Costco. The hassle here is the one thing I have against it. But that is so overwhelmed by the other positive things. First of all, I live 20 or 25 minutes from a Costco, and I love that they actually answer their phones. So if I call to say, do you have such and such a product in stock, they look it up in the computer and they tell me. And that saves me gas and time and money if it's sold out. I love that. I love that they have easy returns. If you're not satisfied with a product, they just take it back. It's no problem. I love that they sell top-tier gas at a discount. I use only Costco to gas up my car. I love their pharmacy so much that I've changed all my prescriptions to Costco. They're just fast and easy and nice. I just love it. And I love the free food samples. I have to come more and more often.
Mary, thank you.
Midday.
Thanks so much for your call, Mary. I'm going to go to Sophia in Leonia, New Jersey. Sophia, you're on WNYC.
Hi. Yeah, one thing I really love about Costco is I feel like it caters to the local community, and they carry things like ethnically diverse food products that you won't find in your grocery store. Like, I bought like a biryani mix from India. And I feel like, you can't find these things elsewhere. And I feel like I'm always like surprised by what they have in a good way. So that's why I really enjoy going there.
Sophia, thanks so much for that call. And let's go to Susan in Brooklyn, who I think wants to pick up on a point that you were making, Molly, about Costco's commitment to DEI.
Sure.
Susan, you're on WNYC.
Hi. Yes, it is a pleasure to support a corporation that defied Trump's mandate against DEI. It is a pleasure to go into a store where both the employees and the customers represent everybody. It's a real antithesis to what Amazon represents. It's also in terms of the products, as other people have mentioned, they have a large selection of organic products, and it's really a pleasure to have this as an option for major shopping.
Susan, thanks so much for your call. So Molly, a lot of love for Costco from those particular shoppers.
Yeah.
But I want to get into something that you wrote about in your story that I just, I'm struggling to wrap my head around. You wrote that 71% of Icelanders are Costco members.
Huh?
Which, yeah, I mean, that's just like, I can't even understand that number. First of all, how do you know that? And what does that small country example tell us about Costco's international appeal?
Oh gosh, I believe the reason I know that, I think, is thanks to David and Susan Schwartz, who are two tremendous Costco fans who live on the Upper West Side and wrote a book called The Joy of Costco, which is a real compendium of Costco trivia, Costco history, Costco lore. They are extremely devoted to Costco, and they also like to say that they live in one of the smallest apartments in New York, and yet they shop there. So they really are a fountain of this stuff if you're interested, and you should check out their book. But I think that, the Iceland factoid is fascinating. I was totally surprised by that too. I mean, I think it speaks to the role that Costco plays in places that, where you're kind of not looking at a typical, urban or suburban car culture sprawl kind of landscape, like where shopping is going to be sort of more concentrated and focused, and you're really stockpiling because things are being flown in from elsewhere. Things are more centralized. Hawaii has a big Costco culture. There are warehouses in Alaska that have been there for decades now that have devoted shoppers. It's really fascinating to see how its business model has sort of taken root and been embraced in all kinds of different communities with all kinds of different needs.
So Molly, I mean, obviously you had to dig deep into the Costco culture and understanding why as we heard from those callers, so many people love shopping there, but it's more complicated than that. And your piece wrestles with whether that feeling that, Costco is kind of a family can survive the company's growth and the pressures it faces now. So what does your reporting reveal about what's actually changing inside Costco, and what do those changes mean for people who work there?
Sure, it's interesting because it sort of is subtle. And, I went into this, as we've said, with a large amount of affection for Costco. So I was not someone who was setting out to do a Costco takedown or anything by any means. But, I am very conscious just as someone who doesn't like to necessarily idealize a corporation, as someone who, has been an employee of any number of businesses or companies and has seen them evolve over time, and, has a sense of how, success is exciting when you're inside it and when you're kind of on the upswing and you're growing and you're building something new. But maintaining the things that got you to that point could be a real challenge. And I think that, going from being kind of a scrappy underdog to being like the big player in a particular niche is a real challenge for any company. And I was curious to see how Costco was navigating that. And I think, they have had huge success in the last decade or so, last 5 years or so, even especially. They really, really experienced a boom amid the pandemic and in the years that followed. And, a number of people were kind of won over to this model of warehouse shopping who might not have been Costco members before. But that has meant that, a company that was really built on this very hands-on kind of management style. Jim Sinegal, who was the CEO, one of the co-founders and the CEO for many, many years, made a point of visiting every warehouse. And, this was a company with hundreds of warehouses. There are now over 900 around the world. I went to the opening of the 913th Costco back in August.
Wow.
But, when you're operating at that scale, the company does still make an effort to keep its executives very in touch with what's going on the warehouse level. But, it is meaningful when employees have a sense that they are important to the company and to the work that it's doing, and that their needs are taken seriously and that their contributions are valued. Something that Costco has made a big point of over time is promoting from within and sort of cultivating the sense of the company as a meritocracy, where if you are someone who starts out driving a forklift, if you are super savvy about the business and super ambitious and driven, perhaps you will be able to rise to the C-suite. You know, the current CEO, Ron Vakras, is someone who had that career path. He started off driving a forklift and became a regional manager and now runs the whole show. But, you know, that's a lot harder to do when you are as big as they are now. And when you kind of face a new host of pressures from, for example, Wall Street, you know,
Sure.
as a company's approach to compensation for executives evolves, you know, as people start to be more attuned to what the stock price is doing, that does kind of create pressures that can be difficult to resist if you are a company that has all along been, say, trying to charge as little as you possibly can. One of Senegal's sort of sayings over the years during his leadership was that he thought that charging more for a given product, you know, bumping up the margin that they were making on a given item was like heroin. You know, he was like, you could do just a little bit, but like, how would you ever stop? There's no one, you know, how would you stop yourself if you went from charging a 14% margin to charging 15, 16, 17? And so there was a real sense of almost willpower on the corporate level involved in keeping the prices low. But, you know, over time, as sort of the leadership that built the company begins to retire, begins to turn over, you see real changes. And one thing that I know a lot of employees have found ominous, for example, is that the company's new CFO, Gary Millerchip, is someone who came to the company from Kroger, which is a grocery chain that has gotten a lot of bad press, has really come under fire over the years for its treatment of employees and for the way that during the pandemic, especially, Kroger profited while they had a number of employees who were facing homelessness or relying on food stamps, you know, people who were really struggling, and that was kind of how the company managed to make the money that it made and build the success that it built, which feels antithetical to the Costco way of doing things. So, you know, I think there's a lot of anxiety for a number of employees about whether or not there will still be the same commitment that they had seen in previous decades to their well-being.
Molly, you know, that reminds me of an anecdote that you refer to in the story about the CEO's commitment to keeping the price of hot dogs at $1.50. But, you know, I know a lot of people have heard that story, but for listeners who haven't, can you just tell it briefly and what you think the endurance of that anecdote reveals about how Costco sees itself and how people want to see the company?
Sure. No, it's funny. I feel like I'm participating in Costco oral tradition here. It really is something that has become part of the lore around the company. But Craig Jelinek, who was the CEO for about a decade, he was Senegal's successor. In 2018, he told this story at the Issaquah Chamber of Commerce, which is the local chamber of commerce for Costco's home base in Washington State. And he described how some years earlier, you know, he had been an executive, but not yet the CEO. Senegal was his boss. And he had gotten worried about a famous Costco food court staple, which is the $1.50 hot dog and soda combo meal. He had thought, you know, there's just no way like we can keep charging this price. Like it's been this price for decades now. You know, yeah, people expect it, but like what are we going to do to make ends meet here? This is not sustainable with the current economy. And so he went to Senegal with these concerns. And what Senegal said to him in his telling was, hang on a second, let me get this exactly right. What Senegal said to him in his telling was, if you raise the effing hot dog, I will kill you. Figure it out. And so this is obviously like a delightful story. It becomes a huge kind of like, you know, meme almost. It goes viral, I guess would be the way to say it. And I think the point that Jelinek was trying to make was that Costco did figure it out. They managed to keep the hot dog price at $1.50, and they did that in part by, you know, starting their own hot dog production plant. So they brought production in-house so they could find various efficiencies and make things work more smoothly and cheaply. But of course, what everyone took away from it was like, oh my God, like this company has CEOs who will like fight to the death for hot dog prices. Like this sense of a CEO as a man of the people, as someone who's almost a folk hero or something is really striking in contrast to, I don't know, almost any other CEO you could possibly think of in the American corporate landscape. Like this is a very different way of relating to the powers that be than thinking of like an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos or something.
You know, Molly, one longtime driver told you that when he got his Costco job offer, quote, I thought I won the lotto. The first thing they said was, welcome to the family. You know, I'm wondering, there's other things going on, though, under the surface there at Costco. And we mentioned some of this idea that there's some union talks happening.
Yeah,
How is that, I think people see this as a corporation that is doing good things, but, is there some pushback against those efforts to unionize?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the company has been sort of wary, I think, in its response to the recent unionization efforts. This is, for context, a company that has, throughout much of its lifetime, had a small percentage of its workforce that was unionized because of mergers. There was sort of a unionized workforce that was brought into the company. They kept those warehouses, those Costco locations unionized, but there hadn't been any real spread or growth in the union until the last few years, when you started to see a handful of pockets of union activity. And what was striking to me in talking to some of the people who had been involved in that effort was the degree to which their complaints seemed not necessarily so much to do with wages or benefits, the really concrete kind of bread and butter stuff that often you hear. I mean, although they certainly do have, concerns about concrete, actionable, objective things that happen in their workplaces. But, many of them will say, this is still a better company on paper to work for than many other companies, just by virtue of how well they pay their employees and the kinds of benefits they offer. But they do describe a sort of intangible sense that they feel less valued by the company, that it feels like there was a kind of this elusive sense of camaraderie, of people kind of working as a team and really being supported by management, being encouraged to grow and be trained and kind of expand their responsibilities, that perhaps has fallen by the wayside as the company has become larger, has become more successful, has become more focused on outward-facing metrics. And I think that's tough because, I think a lot of it goes back to some degree to the very specific sense that people had of Senegal and his leadership. And, I spoke to a guy who had worked at Costco for 16 years. He started there when he was in his teens, and he's now a dad in his 30s. And he remembers Senegal visiting one of his warehouses and shaking every employee's hand, thanking everyone by name, and really feeling this sense of okay, this guy has our backs. And what he said is that over the years, executives continued to visit, there was still a hands-on management style in that way, but that it began to feel a bit more disciplinary, or we're kind of watching to see if you're going to do something wrong, rather than we are looking for an opportunity to kind of congratulate you, support you, show appreciation for the work you're doing. So it's tricky to see how you maintain that stuff just over time and as a company scales.
Molly, we have a listener who texted, your guest makes Costco sound like some cutie mom and pop shop, but their executives earn multi-million-dollar salaries. Not sure what the romance with a corporation like that is about. And similarly in your reporting, or not similarly, another point in your reporting is that there is something of maybe an old boys club dynamic in the corporation, and women struggle there to access promotion. So I'm just wondering, what did those accounts reveal to you about the parts of the company that the public doesn't see? And, how do you is this sort of a romance with a big corporation rooted because its founders are, it's a family founded organization, or is there something else there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. I'm glad this person brought it up, because I do, I certainly don't want to sound like I'm idealizing this company inappropriately, or sort of romanticizing what is, at the end of the day, a money-making business. I think it's worth noting, to the question of the CEO's salaries, that I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but if you look up sort of the records over time, Senegal for sure, and I believe his successors as well, have taken salaries that are much, much lower than their peers among the Fortune 500. They have sort of been notable outliers in that regard, for what it's worth. But I think you bring up an important point about the way that what to some people feels like a supportive, intimate, familial dynamic within the company can feel to other people like something exclusionary, or something that, if you're not on the inside of that love, it can feel like you are limited or being excluded. And about 10 years ago, or it was kind of it took a while to work through the legal system, but about in the early aughts, there was a class action suit that was brought by a number of women who said that they had struggled to rise through the ranks at the company, had struggled to find management positions in warehouses because they felt like those positions were not being publicized or posted in a public way such that they could know that there were opportunities available, which, the company ended up settling those suits in 2013 for $8 million. And, I think it speaks to the fact that, if your company is all about cultivating relationships internally and people kind of having these long running collegial bonds, someone is inevitably going to be left out of that. And if the way that your company runs is based entirely on, one person's sense of right and wrong, that's going to be limited because, Senegal, for example, for all his, strengths that people heralded, was someone who was totally dismissive of these women's complaints. He really, in a number of interviews over the years and in speaking with us as well, like kind of waved them off and, was not concerned about the accounts that they had offered of their experiences. So, there's a big difference between being a company that is organized from the ground up and has, sort of almost democratic sense of employees bringing their concerns to the leadership in a direct way, and one that is sort of guided top down in an almost paternalistic way.
It's a fascinating look. You've definitely tapped into something that our listeners have an interest in. Really great piece. And I want to thank my guest, Molly Fisher, staff writer at The New Yorker. The article is Can the Golden Age of Costco Last? We'll all be watching. Molly, thank you so much for coming on with us today.
Thank you for having me. It was really fun.